So joining us today, we have Rita Capezzi, a former colleague of mine and a very dear friend who was also my mentor at Canisius College. And thanks to her, I somehow managed to get tenure. So appreciate that. Rita has since left Canisius and is now a pastor. And I've asked her to talk to us about pastoral care during COVID. I'm pretending I'm in her backyard at her new house. So let me pretend that. So Rita, how would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Well, I'll just let you know that I am a minister in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. We are a liberal, non-creedal religion. In other words, your beliefs about the holy are that's your spiritual path, and we find it valuable to share our different understanding. Diversity of all sorts is a human strength, and that is what we value above everything. And I'm very pleased to be serving a fellowship in Mankato, Minnesota, which is south of the Twin Cities by about an hour and a half. So we are very close to the events of George Floyd's murder, and our community is responding to that, though we are quite a small city of just about the size of Niagara Falls.
Thank you for clarifying your affiliation, and I love what you said about diversity as strength. It's something that we need to live that more fully. I wonder if you could talk then about how your community is responding to the George Floyd protests, either locally or sort of more globally.
So in our community, we are very much affected by COVID, and it's pretty traditional for churches to have an older population. And so we're very mindful of the people who are over 70 and at risk, and mindful that it's not really possible for them to safely go into protests or rallies. And so those of us who are in an age group where we are able to do that are doing that. So I participated in an interfaith rally up in the Twin Cities. It took place both near Cup Foods, where Mr. Floyd was murdered, and also in St. Paul, near the areas where there had been riots and looting and burned businesses in the capital part of the city. These rallies were organized by religious leaders of color. And it's very much understood that for white ministers, it is our role to move in support of Black leadership and Black religious leadership, and to act as buffers when needed, to act in solidarity, and not to lead whatever efforts are felt to be necessary for confronting the systemic racism that is obviously a part of the Minneapolis and St. Paul police departments, and of course more widely in many of our institutions, including those in small town America. And I've been following what's going on in Buffalo, so I'm very aware of how the police and the city government have responded to protest and the challenges that the protesters are rightly bringing to the institutions that continue to act in oppressive ways to people of color. So attending a rally is one way that the community has been supportive. When I was called here, the congregation was looking for a minister who would be active in social justice. That wasn't always what seemed to be needed in the first year that I was here. I've just been here for 2 years now, but it's been clear that it is very much what is needed now. And so our support has included local, my participation in local protests. There is a nightly 8-minute, 46-second vigil on the bridges across the Minnesota River that unite two of our communities. And there is a rally for racial justice and a walk or run this evening that I'll be attending. I always attend in clergy garb, a collar, and a stole, so that my participation as a religious leader is visible. So that my participation as a religious leader counterbalances some of the religious leaders who have a more conservative understanding of our human value, and so that religion is not co-opted by right-wing thinkers. We've donated money to causes because we have money. And again, not everyone can participate in physical actions. And so that is a way that we act as a community to help the efforts for racial justice. Not so, some donations for mercy, right, to alleviate immediate needs, but also some that go toward structural change. The denomination itself is very active in social change. And so we have something in Unitarian Universalism called UU the Vote. And it is a nationwide effort to work against voter suppression, to communicate with governmental leaders about the values that we want to see enacted in our society. So at a local level and at a more national level, ours is a denomination that puts justice at the center. And I suppose in a lot of ways, and I'll get this quotation wrong, but as Dr. Cornel West says, that justice is love in public. And so we are working for justice.
So I'm glad you mentioned about wearing your clergy garb when you are protesting and doing other acts of to draw attention to the issues, because I feel that all too often the voices that get heard from faith traditions are the loud, angry, conservative, right-wing ones that, to my mind and my understanding, don't actually live out the values I find in the Gospels. Do you get any pushback from within your congregation about these activities, or is it a more unanimous perspective?
Well, there are a couple of issues. Some of you may have heard of the notion of Minnesota nice. People are kind of confrontation avoidant. That's really difficult for an Easterner like me from Pennsylvania and New York. I've sometimes wondered, am I as supported as I would like to believe I am, because there's no opposition. My very wise son said to me, "Mom, take them at face value. Just do what you're doing." So that's what I've been doing, and I do have overt support from the board. That's how our churches govern each other, by boards, and so from my board, and there is some resistance at moments, especially because in worship I've been very preoccupied with justice making. And how I address it is really in terms of where white people are on the spectrum of awareness of oppression. And so when there are members who have police officers in their families or military people in their families, there's a lot of difficult feelings, because white Americans tend to view our reality in very individualistic terms. And so we think about our lives, our connection, our family members, are they good people or not? and so don't often recognize the ways in which we are parts of structures that are operating around us, and through our actions, and sometimes to the detriment of many people's lives. That lack of awareness comes off as racist and confrontational, and doesn't necessarily map to a person's values or heart. And so it's my role to help people see the limitations of their vision, to be a pastoral partner as they confront things that they don't understand about themselves or don't like, and to remain open to the possibility of individual change, since the change within white people is required in order for larger structures to be shifted. And I think about white women's right to vote in 1920, which could not have happened if men hadn't agreed to shifting practices and shifting policies. So that's why we're needed here. And our role is to change ourselves and to listen to the stories of people whose experiences are not those that we ourselves have.
So is your congregation majority white or exclusively white, or what is the racial, ethnic makeup?
I live in a county that is 95% white, and 5% people of color, including Latinx people, many of whom work in meatpacking plants, and Black people, some Asian people. Many of the Black people in this community are Somali refugees. I live in a town that's 90% white, and so a little more diverse because of the university and because Somali people tend to live in the towns, in the city, they call it, rather than in the countryside. And my congregation is primarily white and includes some people who are Asian background,
Okay.
but primarily white.
Right. So I liked what you said about the exploring the limitations of people's vision and encouraging people to change and accompanying them on the difficult process of change, which can often highlight parts of ourselves we don't like or are ashamed of or something. How do you do that? I mean, do you have recommended readings? Do you do this through prayer and reflection? What are some strategies to encourage people's self-reflection towards evolution?
Well, there are a number of different tactics. So one thing I want to say is, of course, I am a white person growing into awareness, right? Just like everybody else. And my own life experiences and my own education put me on a certain place in that spectrum, but we're all on a spectrum. And I'm behind some of the people in my congregation. I'm a little ahead of some people in the congregation, maybe a little more ahead of some others. But I try to model a learner perspective. I am learning along with everyone else. So since May 30th, our worship services, which is the primary way that we are meeting right now, of course, they have been oriented toward stories of people of color. I was an English professor before I became a minister, and while I know that it's policies and institutions that ultimately need to be changed in order for oppression to cease. I also know that it's through stories and proximity that we actually shift our hearts. And so because we live in a community that is so predominantly white, and our congregation itself is white, I have invited people to hear ministers of color, music by people of color, stories by people of color, with the invitation to sit with discomfort and see as true experiences that are not like our own. So, you know that people will say, well, I don't see color, or I don't see that was unfair. It's because that's not your experience. You don't have that happen to you. But why is it not true if it didn't happen to you? Mm-hmm. And that's some of the unfolding work. Some also is to offer opportunities for study. So we are doing, we don't want to just do a book club, but we are doing some study. I will be going on vacation soon, and I have invited the congregation into the 21-day racial education challenge. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's one article or one movie or some one thing you can do a day for 21 days, just to have there be more awareness. I'm also inviting people into a recognition of their own stories around race, right? When did you first experience race? When did you first know about race? How old were you? And how was that information communicated to you? And how did your family of origin address it? Because that's where we can begin to understand what whiteness means and what our own exposure has been. And so what are our baselines for moving through our own resistance to the stories of others that don't correspond exactly to our own? And that's, people raise up a lot of hurt. We learn things about ourselves that we don't like, that we may have participated in without much thought. And that recognition that for those of us who are white, we get to spend considerable parts of our lives not thinking about race and not thinking about the consequences of living in a racialized country when our siblings of color do not have that respite. And that produces, that produces suffering, to know that others are suffering, and we are able to avoid some of that. The other thing that I'm trying to highlight too are that people of color have survived because they are resilient and they produce beautiful art and communities of support that many of us who are not people of color can learn from. And I don't mean to say that I'm asking people of color to teach. I'm asking that white people actually look at art and writing made by people of color and communities of color and just see, that there is joy in the midst of difficulty, and that's a reason why people are still here to fight for equity.
I find this all very inspiring and very useful for my own position as a teacher. I feel that you're still a teacher, actually.
Maybe.
No, I do find this really quite interesting. I think what I have learned in teaching about migration issues is that humanizing the experience and providing opportunities for white students primarily to interact with those people, to meet them, to know that they're human beings who are going through life the same way with the same desires and hopes, and that is what changes people. I think that I think all too often it's easy to stay in our bubbles, and because we don't see things, they don't exist. So I think that's a powerful way, and like you say, through learning, through art, through literature, through the stories that people tell. I'm curious about the 21 day. Is that because Black History Month is 21 days?
I don't know. I don't know. You know, book studies are hard, right? I think that a book is going to be easy, and this is where it's not like teaching at all. I don't have a captive audience. So a book study can be challenging because people, you know, you want to do it for more than one day, and you want to, and people have different levels of education and interest. And so a book that might seem, you know, pretty easy for me to read might seem really difficult for somebody else to read, and then they can't enter into it. And of course, we have a very educated population in the UU world, but we still have people who have high school degrees. And so you want to make it as inclusive as possible. So I've realized that short things are sometimes more effective. And it's not that there's not a learning goal at the end, except to shift your perspective a little bit, right? To just be willing to engage. You know, I'll share stories about my own experience. Like I shared a story about watching the movie Roma, which is a marvelous movie. You'll have to say the name for me, Richard, who made that movie.
Oh, Cuarón.
Yeah, and so one of the things I always experience when I watch movies that are not American movies is that I don't understand the arc of the narrative, right? I don't know where the you know, the peak is, because it's a different aesthetic. And to watch a movie by a director and a cast from another culture is to ride a different wave, you know, and if you give yourself over to it, then you learn. I don't even know sometimes what that learning is, but it's a learning that there's other ways to write a story and other ways to represent lives. And so I encourage people lots of times, you know, it's not directly about learning the facts of oppression. It's about learning to open yourself up to things that are not your own and let yourself develop from that. So I really enjoyed Parasite and hope they never make an American version of that. Because there's no way to, right? That arc I didn't understand it, and I still think about it, as well as the characterizations, as well as the heartache that was so meaningfully represented in the midst of kind of zany aesthetic at moments. So it's so that challenge, that 21-day challenge, has short pieces and films, you know, or YouTubes, or something that's kind of more doable, I think. And that's one of the reasons that I'm inviting people in. And some people will do all of it because we've got good students, right? People think there's an A at the end. And some people pick around and do what they can, and that will be good. And it's just then an opening for conversation, because being increasingly comfortable to talk is the way we grow ourselves as human beings. And fuller, more developed human beings care more about each other and the world. And I suppose if there's a belief system for Unitarian Universalism, it's that. Everyone has inherent worth and dignity. Everyone is on the web of interdependence. And in between, we have to try to seek the truth and develop our spirits as best we can, working for equity in the world. So
these are very good lessons, whether one is within a church or faith tradition or not. I think these are very useful lessons. Well, sorry, this is just a little plug for my own interests, but it's why I'm so disheartened, I think, at the constant erosion of foreign language study and foreign culture study, because it continues to delimit our experience and our ability to converse from different perspectives. As you mentioned, these, you know, two films, Roma and Parasite, that are not American narratives. And I am saddened by the disintegration of that in our culture. I wonder, of these 21 day racial education challenge, have you started this yet, or?
No, it starts July 1st.
July 1st.
Yeah.
So have you picked things out yet, or?
Someone else picked them out. So, you know, sometimes you have to rely on the prompts of others. But so, you know, so there are some things you might expect. So there's an invitation to see Just Mercy. There's an invitation to watch 13. There's an invitation to watch, what's that Jackie Robinson movie, 42? Is that what it's called?
I don't know.
Yeah, just to you know, to watch films that are highlighting the search for justice in a number of forms. And then there are articles from a variety of African American scholars and activists, you know, equally. And so, you know, again, easy things that you can read in a few minutes to sort of open your eyes. It's not that each piece is a very in-depth analysis. It's that each piece offers a chance to see something you didn't see before. So I think that video that Kimberly Jones is in, have you seen that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I believe her husband was the filmmaker. She is a young adult writer and filmmaker from Atlanta who came to Minneapolis to film what was happening there with the protests. And she describes, you can Google this, Racism and a Monopoly, where she starts to describe, you know, in a fairly like journalistic kind of way, what she's seeing. And then she quickly moves into anger and pain and suffering that things have not changed, and uses Monopoly, playing the game of Monopoly for 400 years without being able to have any money. And then for 50 years with having to give all the money back that you're allowed to have, and that people loot because they don't own anything, you know. So it's that kind of an analysis. And that's one of the pieces. I actually published that in our weekly newsletter yesterday. A cleaned up version, because her language has been kind of salty, and as a minister, it doesn't mean I don't swear. It's just that I think carefully about that coming from a platform, a religious platform, because some people just shut it off, right? I mean, I think that swear words are perfectly good words in useful places, and sometimes church is not the best place for them. So the filmmaker had bleeped her when it was particularly challenging.
I will look that up, and for our listeners, I will post that link into the module. And are you open to suggestions from people for this topic?
Oh yeah.
I want to really recommend I Am Not Your Negro.
Oh yeah, that might be on the list too. That's such a great.
It's so great because it's also the intersectionality of sexuality, sexual orientation, and race that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think maybe on Facebook you posted something about the fire this time, fire next time.
Yeah.
Those are interesting to read, both of those together.
Yeah.
The Baldwin and then the contemporary version. And I also really love, to go back to your earlier point about resilience and art, and I really love Maya Angelou, and I know why the caged bird sings.
Yeah.
There's so much that could be devastating there, and yet there's so much hope and beauty.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know both of those things.
Yes, I agree.
So that's just my 3 little cents worth there.
I am happy. One of the things that I will do on my vacation is return to some of the books that were particularly formational for me. I first read both Their Eyes Were Watching God and The Color Purple when I was in graduate school the first time in the early 1980s. And Toni Morrison followed from there. I read everything that she wrote. And I taught The Bluest Eye for the first time, I think in 1986 or something like that. So it's gratifying to see those books still offered as opportunities to learn and understand. And so I look forward to returning to those, as well as to Octavia Butler, though I think I have to rebuy all her books because I loaned them out. And I never keep track of that sort of stuff, right? And we're all supposed to be paring down and,
Yeah, well.
thinking about what we really need, but the books, I still like reading books, like in my hand.
I cannot read if it's not a paper thing I have in my hands. It's just,
yeah. I prefer that too. So I look forward to being able to return to some of those things, just as I take time to kind of recharge and take a little, respite before the work starts again.
Yeah, I spent one summer many years ago now reading everything Toni Morrison ever wrote, every single thing.
Yeah.
And
I had a dissertation that failed. And I know now that what I was trying to write about was intersectionality, but there was no language for it then. And so it didn't work. But I read everything that Zora Neale Hurston had written, except for Baccaroon, right? Because I didn't know about that book.
Right.
So that's on the list for this summer too, in all of its controversy.
So we've actually spent all this time talking about racial issues and not COVID, but to my mind, those things are connected in the sense that COVID provided, I feel, a pause in life that both highlighted already existing inequities, and the pause also provided an opportunity for perhaps more reflection and response, because people aren't distracted by or oppressed by all the distractions, both pleasant, going out to eat, and negative, having to work, that I think that these things are connected in interesting ways. And I don't mean to say, oh, how great that we had a plague, but that there are curious ways in which these two moments, George Floyd and COVID, have intersected that are opportunities, or that could be opportunities.
One of the things that I'm aware of in my own reconciliation with reality, with the reality of COVID, is that, if we address our feelings of loss, which everyone is feeling, if we address those feelings, it puts us in a position to build resilience. And so I wouldn't have wished a plague on anyone, including myself. There are many things that are hard. People die, people are born, people are married in all ways that are not the way we want that to happen right now. And so even the most joyful occasions are also sad in these times. But these are our times. We can't not have them be that. The people of the 1300s who were dying of bubonic plague also did not want that to be their reality, and too bad. So no, I wouldn't wish it, and it is the truth. And so as we reconcile with the restrictions and our changed sense of values, that helps us to build resilience that is absolutely needed for the work of justice. White people often have been, people who protested and worked so hard during the first civil rights movement thought change happened. And then the maintenance didn't happen. The continuing effort didn't happen. That's what we can't ever let happen again, that falling off from the work. And so how do you stay in it when it seems like it never ends, right? We will plant the seed of the tree that we will not sit under. I know there's a good Catholic who said that, but I don't remember who it was.
Or it sounds also like a Chinese proverb. I'm not sure.
Could be, right? There's wisdom everywhere.
So has your pastoral work in both the COVID era and with the racial consciousness that we've been talking about, has that all occurred online, or has that occurred in other ways?
It's mostly online. I think as everyone, with the loosening of restrictions, we find ways to be, especially with the good weather, we find ways to be outside and distance, which in some ways is almost harder. I wrote a short reflection for a UUA publication quite close to the beginning of this, where I said, I'm in a high-touch profession in a no-touch reality. And so in strange ways, there's no pat on the arm or the hand, there's no hug, there's no sitting close to someone, there's no feeling the body language of another person. And when something I say or do has helped them to notice something about themselves and their physical energy shifts, there's no way to do that in the same way. And so I feel a little bit like a silent movie actress. It's all in the face, right? It's all in the eyes and the face. And so I was once told that I had the face of a B movie actress. And so it turns out that's exactly what's needed.
No.
There's a little bit of exaggeration, I, of course, was very hurt by that comment the years ago that it was made, and I've kept it close. And, like so many things, it's turned out to be very useful. And so how to communicate with my own body when I'm not next to someone, that I am listening to them, that I'm hearing them, that I am giving them that space to just hear themselves. I did not think I would be able to do that, disembodied, and it turns out that we actually can do that. And so people who probably, were separated in the military or separated by other long distances have probably known this, right? That you can still keep connection. But now we all have to learn how to do it. And so pastoral care makes me sad. It makes me sadder because I can't be with a person. And at the same time, there's still ways to offer that listening, that comfort of being heard. And so that part of my work has not changed at all. I just had to find that I could do it in a different format. And I didn't at first believe that that was possible. But, you have to make a way because the need is still there.
Right. That parallels very much my own experience. When we had to go online for teaching, I thought, oh, this is just not going to work. I'm an engaged, I engage physically,
Yes.
and there's so much about it that's the physicality of my classroom. But I found a way, and it turns out that it was actually good. And, because I think the clue was that I still listened and I still wanted to find a way. And Who knew?
Yeah. Well, and wanting to make it be is half the problem, right?
Right,
That's the
right.
solution. It's like, well, I want it to be. I don't know what it will be, but I'm not going to sit around and lament
Right.
what can't be, right? I cannot do certain things. So what am I going to focus on that for?
Exactly. And I came up with really interesting new things that I have decided eventually when we are face to face that I can use those things. My teachers are better. I did not
Right.
expect.
It's great. Some people are learners. The learners have an easier time in life.
Yep.
That's what I think.
I agree. And we're constantly learning if we're open to it.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Rita, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I feel hopeful again and inspired, and I miss you, but I'm also very happy to see the things that you're doing. And I get to enjoy your backyard virtually. So
Yes. And I'll be doing it for the rest of my life, I think. Like somebody wrote one day, so much sameness. It's like, yes, that's so much a part of our lives, right? We just had to bear it.
Right. And see the beauty in it.
So thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you so much.
Okay.